At the same time, I would like to, every time we respond to the question about responsibilities, who are the subjects who are responsibilized is the question that we have to follow up with. What I mean by that, just very quickly, the debate about the deprivation of children in the UK in the last 2-3 days, why it has come up in the bottom and so on. There's an issue, and the debate is being conducted. So far in the media, what I've been able to observe is that there's this notion that responsibilities, what we are lacking is the responsibilities. But what is meant by that is often the subject of those responsibilities, who's responsibilized by that automatic talk of responsibilities, is inevitably parents and families. There is this desocializing, decentralizing devolution going on when one uses the word automatically responsibility. But then, what about the responsibilities of other actors, such as the state, in terms of addressing child deprivation, poverty, and whatnot? That is just very quickly brushed over and then sort of neglected. So when we do talk about responsibilities, we do need to immediately bring up, as regards what subjects of responsibilities we're talking about and whom is being responsibilized when we use the term. I think those things have to be put on the table. Given that we do that, and given that we don't drop out the rights couplet of rights and responsibilities, then I have no aversion to talk about responsibilization and responsibilities. I think that's a significant aspect of citizenship discourse. But then, thanks to work that's been done on governance and governmentality, and Janet mentioned this, citizenship always walks on the thin edge. I'm not getting the metaphor right. Anyway, citizenship runs the risk of always falling one or the other side of a situation where it could mean actually activating rights-bearing subjects who can articulate their claims, as opposed to being caught in citizenship, how did Janet call it? Citizenship in the web of, like, being interpolated into active citizenship, but the parameters of that activeness are severely delimited. So these are governmental projects through which actually certain subjectification going on. Obviously, when we use the language of rights and responsibilities, we need to show sensitivity to that, the issue of what kind of citizenship, what are the subjects of citizenship. That always has to be asked. I think related to that, okay, this issue of rights is a little, perhaps can be interpreted as a masculine way of thinking about citizenship. Rights-bearing warriors, going back to that image. Does it need to be? Genealogically speaking, it may well be. That might be its genealogy, the speaking of rights-bearing subjects, going back to the very Greek subject of citizenship, which is a warrior. And it carried itself not with continuity, but with certain consistency for 2,000 years that we even think about, it's unthinkable to think, it's unthinkable to constitute citizens without military service. And then we are going through the sort of teething problems of that, having accepted that military service is also not an obligation of citizenship anymore, at least in certain states. Be that as it may, I accept that perhaps it is a masculine language of citizenship. I do not think that it needs to be. In the way in which we might think of rights as dialogue, or rights as always rights claims being articulated as consequence of dialogue, I don't see why it would eliminate or exclude the issues of communication, translation across various idioms and languages of being, translation across different ways of relating to one another, translation across various social groups. In a way, that is the bread and butter of relational conception of rights. Not just insular and insulating conception, but a relational conception that always rights of some is always bringing certain restrictions of the rights of others. How do we deal with that? There is that complexity always, and I think dialogue and communication are part of that. 2 minutes. The issue of, well, social science. I think, what have we learned from psychoanalytical insight? The subjects don't necessarily have to be aware of exactly what they're doing for us to indicate. This is not a question of aggression or being aggressive social scientists, telling exactly what to do, what the subjects should do. But it is also a case in social life that subjects don't have always either the language or the consciousness, intentionality, or the way in which they orient to the world and articulate things. This is perhaps where I would differ from Foucauldian conception of the political, where, if you recall in his dialogue with Gilles Deleuze, there was an ontological primacy given to the voice of the other. But then social sciences have responsibility also in articulating voices that are latent and not articulated. They are not articulated not because they are inarticulate, but they are using, as I said, paradoxical, contradictory idioms. And our responsibility is neither to just sort of give absolute primacy to the voice that is spoken on the street, nor to consider the language that we create as having absolute primacy, but actually work at the interstices of both and see how our idioms can actually emulate and learn from the languages that are used on the street, and similarly to place demands upon actors when we see them to actually take, understand, and respond to the concepts that we produce. I have never had hesitancy about that. If that creates uncertain and sort of tension-filled moments, so be it. I'm prepared for that. But I cannot give absolute primacy to the voice that's supposed to be authentic because it comes from the street. I don't know if that answers.
Thank you very much. We must finish there. Just before we thank Engin with the applause, let me say that the jazz trio is striking up in about 1 minute's time, at 6:15. I hope you're all going to stay for that, a drink, some food, and possibly even getting up on your feet to the music. But with that in mind, let me thank Engin very much for giving us that agenda for CCIG's future.
Thanks very much for organizing.